Hello there. I am Eddie Mercado with BloodyElbow.com, and welcome to the 6th Round Retro. The date, October 11th, 1997. The event, Pride Fighting Championships 1. Where at? The Tokyo Dome, of course, in Japan. And my co-host for the evening will be none other than longtime combat sports journalist and Bloody Elbow's own Fraser Coffeen. Fraser, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. It's the 20th anniversary of the very first Pride ever. It happened on October 11th. Today, technically in Japan right now, is the 11th, so we are right 20 years down the line. Here we are looking back, seeing what went down, how it went down, and kind of see where it turned into. Now, major significance with Pride. I mean, it really... it became this, it set in motion one of the most prestigious battlegrounds in MMA to date. Like, it had a strong blend of spectacle, of sport, and I mean, it produced legends like Fedor Emelianenko, Big Nog, Igor Vojtechkin, who's one of my favorites, and crazy personalities like Bob Sapp and Yoshihiro Takayama and Vanderlei Silva. So before we run through the results and what transpired and everything, Fraser, what are your thoughts on the very first Pride show ever?
Well, I mean, like you said, it spawned such an awesome, huge thing that just like became such a part of MMA and in Pride as a whole. And I think you already nailed kind of what one of the big appeals of Pride was, is that it was this great sort of potpourri of different kinds of things. There's all this stuff. You get these crazy, bizarre fights like Fedor versus Zuluzinho later, not at Pride 1, mind you. And you get big personalities, and you get these super technical fights, and you get these wild brawls. I mean, like, it had everything. And I think that's one of the things a lot of people kind of miss about it nowadays, is that, I still love the UFC. I write about it. I watch it all the time. I love it. But there is a sort of sameness to it a lot of times that I think people kind of miss from Pride, and that starts with Pride 1, which is also just all over the place in just bizarre stuff that's going on. It's a weird card. I watching it again last night, I was reminded of, like, man, this is weird. This is a weird collection of fights.
Yeah, you named it. It's weird. And one of the biggest distinctions between the UFC versus something like Pride was the rule set. Now, in Pride, you're allowed to kick and knee a downed opponent in the head, stomps and soccer kicks included. You can spike and pile drive your opponent. That's legal. We're not allowed to elbow, which was a little unique, but kind of favored the tournament styles. And it was a 10-minute opening round with a 2-minute rest and then a 5-minute round. And there's no 10-point must system. So the judges... they took the whole entire fight into consideration when determining a winner. Now, for Pride 1, they didn't exactly have all their ducks in a row. So it appeared as if each individual match kind of had its own specific rule set, and was each fight was unique. So it wasn't like when you think of Pride and the classic Pride rules, Pride 1 wasn't really that. You definitely saw some illegal strikes, or some like knees to the head of down opponents and kicks and stuff, but they were calling them illegal. So it was a little hodgepodge of rules, but all in all, I mean, it's still Pride. You know what I mean? It's still Pride.
Yeah, I think the rules is an interesting thing. I mean, you were still back then in that Gracie era of Pride, where Hickson headlines this, Henzo's on this one, and the Gracies. Part of the reason that they removed themselves from the UFC was feeling like the rules were not in a way that they liked. So there was kind of always this, they were always a part of Pride, and one of the weird things there was it always seemed like they were able to kind of lay down whatever particular weird Gracie set of rules they wanted for their particular fight. And so here, right, you get that you kind of have a little bit more of their influence, but it's not extended to everywhere. It's a little hard to parse out exactly what the rules are on this particular night.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit weird. But the main event for the evening, Rickson Gracie, the legend, the man went undefeated. He was fighting in the 80s. I mean, when you think of jiu-jitsu greats and you think of Gracie greats, I mean, Rickson's right there at the top. he took on Nobuhiko Takada and did exactly what Rickson Gracie does. He came out in his little mummy stance that he's known for, that just looks ineffective and is like the worst approach that you would never tell anyone to go out in a fight like that. But for him, it's him. Like, it worked perfectly. You know, he was a real treat to watch, a real treat. He scored a first-round armbar, 4 minutes and 47 seconds. I mean, it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. What did you think of the fight?
Yeah, I mean, there's Rickson. So I am a big kind of old school Gracie fan. I really appreciate watching their contributions to the sport, like the whole family. Rickson is one that, right, he's the legend of this generation of Gracies. You know, the 400-0, and he just was held in such high regard and esteem and things like that. But there's really not a ton of footage of Rickson fighting, especially under anything resembling an actual legitimate rule set. I think I've maybe seen 10 Rickson fights, something like that. So just getting to see him in action here is awesome. It's really cool. That aspect of it. Takada is, he's at this point, he's not an MMA fighter. He's a pro wrestler. For those who are not familiar with him, he's a hugely popular pro wrestler in Japan. I mean, him fighting in this was a huge, major, big deal for Japan. So it's not like he's just some complete, schlub or anything like that. But yeah, he's not, he's clearly overmatched, and he, Rickson does the Gracie thing. I like you said, I stand up until I have the opportunity to take you down, and then I just sort of slowly make my way to the armbar, and there we have it.
Yeah, that double leg takedown he hit, though. Oh, man, that was so beautiful and explosive, and really not exactly what you see from your normal Gracies. It's not your typical body lock takedown. It was so authoritative. Like, man.
He had some explosion that I think some of the other Gracies didn't always have. He had that kind of aggressive double leg. The final transition to the armbar is fast. He sort of cooks him for a while to set him up for it. But when Rickson finally at the end commits to going for it, he just goes. And all of a sudden it's just over. It's a very sudden ending after kind of the build to it.
Yeah, and the way he got that armbar was beautiful. It's almost as if he transitioned before he even fully isolated the arm. Like, it was so beautiful. And it's like, if a Gracie's isolating your arm, they're pretty much going to take it home. So it was, Takada did his best, I guess. For your very first professional fight ever, you're fighting Rickson Gracie. That's a tall order. Tall order.
It's tough. And, and then, of course, they rematched at Pride 4, which is a year later. So it is the 19th anniversary of Pride 4. So, we got to represent there. And I remember he did better there. He was able to sort of be a little more defensive. It took Rickson something like 9 minutes or so to beat him that time, because he had just sort of gotten a little bit better in his ability to defend himself. But he's not a grappler, and he's not an MMA fighter. And, to go up against somebody like Rickson Gracie, you've got to be amazing. He's just not.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. So before that, speaking of grapplers who aren't grappling, we had Dan Severn take on Kimo. Both of these guys coming in with UFC experience. Kimo even coming in with a submission win over Kazushi Sakuraba, believe it or not. And these big men just stood in front of each other the entire time, attempting to learn how to strike, is what it seemed like. It was 30 minutes of just Bas Rutten and Steven Quattros just hating on the fight itself, just because it wasn't what everyone thought it was going to be. We thought they were going to come out and grapple, and that's not what happened. They went toe-to-toe, I guess, kind of, just exchanging jabs, and it was kind of hard to watch.
Yeah, it's rough. I feel like when you go back and watch old MMA shows, there's like these certain fights that have this reputation of being like there's like a category of like just bad long fights. And Shamrock Severn is, of course, the kind of gold standard champion of those terrible, lengthy, boring fights. But there's others. There's like Shamrock Taktarov is pretty darn brutal. And I would put this one right in there as a contender for just real real brutalness. And it's 30 minutes and there's no round break. And it's just 30 minutes of just nothing. It's, yeah.
Yeah, and like the Japanese crowd is known for being quiet and respectful and educated, and they were booing. They were booing the entire time. And it's rare. Like Japanese crowds, like they'll give you the benefit of the doubt and they'll let you do your thing. But these guys just, it really, looking back 1997 when, nowadays everyone's a mixed martial artist. Everyone can pretty much stand. Everyone can pretty much grapple. Everyone can wrestle. But back then, I mean, these guys actually spent their entire life learning this one discipline. And then at 40 years old, you have Dan Severn, who's like, I think I want to learn how to strike. So, right. The learning curve is so steep, and it's smart. They were trying to strike against guys who couldn't strike. So it made sense game plan wise. But as far as a show, as far as excitement, as far as entertainment, there was none there to be found. So
yeah, and that's one of the cool things I think about Pride is that they talked about that kind of aspect a lot. And you brought up Quadros and Boss Rutan and their commentary there. And I think no discussion of early Pride could possibly be complete without talking about them. They give, I love them on the show. They add so much to it. And it's because they're willing, when the fight stinks, they're willing to be like, hey, this fight stinks. Like, this is bad. Which, and they bring a lot of entertainment to the show. I know they're not everybody's cup of tea. They've got their haters out there. Really, I love the style that they bring of kind of being a little more honest and kind of, calling it like it is and being willing to really talk about what's actually going on. You're not fooling anybody. It's not good. It's not a good fight. So let's just talk about how it's not a good fight, and let's kind of have some fun watching it and, entertain ourselves in some way. And then I, as a viewer, am entertained more than I would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway from that fight is the commentators really were special, and Boss, with his fight experience, he was always willing to give his opinion on what he thought the fighter should be doing. And that was really ahead of its time. It really takes a certain amount of hubris to sit there and say he should be doing this and he should be doing that, or trying this or trying that. But between Boss's experience, Boss's accent, he got away with it. You know what I mean? It wasn't malicious. It was him being a genuine person and just giving his honest assessment of how he thought he could make the fight better. And I appreciated that. I definitely appreciated it.
Yeah. Well, and he's another guy that had such a mystique around him that he could also get away with it because you always had this sense of oh man, if he was healthy, he would get in there and just wreck these guys. There was that feeling that you got that from him. But he wasn't, but I don't feel like it was a sort of arrogance. There's an easy way for that to cross over into sort of a sort of chest pounding, macho, arrogant kind of thing. And I don't think he ever got there. Maybe that's just because of his sort of style, of his sense of humor and the dynamic that he had with Quadros. But it's, you're right. He's able to sort of come across very knowledgeable and telling how it is, but not a jerk about it in any way. A really, entertaining.
El Guapo, right? Who doesn't love El Guapo?
And the liver shot. So for those who are out there
drinking the liver.
Drink it up.
You have to shout out the liver shot Pride drinking game. That's a staple, right? That's a staple.
Yeah. That's a key to Pride. Is the lever, the taking the shot every time.
The lever, it's beautiful. The lever, it's beautiful. Oh man! So, but
you cannot do the shot game accurately in a Pride show. It's gonna be the death of you.
Oh yeah.
So don't do it.
All right. So there was a crazy, Pride. They were always good about having it a combat sports event. It was never just MMA. It's not just grappling. It's not just kickboxing. It's not just boxing. It's everything. Sumo matches and any type of combat sports. Bring it on. And that's awesome. That was really awesome because, MMA is one brand of fighting. That's one style of fighting. Mm-hmm. And there are so many different disciplines out there still that we know nothing about, that anything can work, right? If you practice anything enough, there's a time and a place for every move. So I really liked how they weren't afraid to bring in disciplines and pin them against each other to see what happened, kind of like UFC 1 in the earlier UFCs, you know, but they also weren't afraid to make those guys 350 pounds, 360 pounds, just these big freak shows. And like, you didn't get that in the UFC. Like, you got some freaks early on, but nothing even close to what Pride was bringing in.
No, well, the UFC at some point decided that their route was to go, you know, to be a legitimate sport with respectability, and so you kind of have to move away from, you know, the 400-pound, 500-pound sumo wrestler versus the, you know, 180-pound pro wrestler if you're going to achieve any degree of respectability. But
yeah,
Pride said,
"What's up?"
Yeah, exactly. See, but now Pride said, "Forget that. We're in. We're doing it. We're going for it every time."
Yeah, it's awesome. And so Pride won. Right off the bat, they had this kickboxing bout. Ralph White took on Bronco Sikatic, and it had the craziest ending. White looked like he fell in a flurry, and then Bronco just rolls up and soccer kicks him right in the head. This ginormous alien formed on the skull of White, and there was just so much confusion. They didn't know if it was legal or not. Of course, in kickboxing, you can't kick someone when they're down. So obviously it was illegal, but they were kind of confused on how to proceed, and they just kind of hung out in the ring for a bit, and no one knew what was going on. But the thing just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's still to this date, it's one of the worst hematomas I've seen. It's like right there with Mark Hominick.
Yeah, and I love, you're right. I love that they can't figure out what to do. So it's this amazing scene where Ralph White's just sitting there in his corner with his thing just getting bigger and bigger, while his corner and the ref sort of argue about what they're going to do about this. And you're just sort of like, well, just, can somebody help that guy? Like, can a doctor like take care of that?
Can we get an Inswell on that, please? It's
yeah.
It was crazy, but that was awesome. That was also what was awesome about the freak show fights and the spectacles is there was always weird stuff going on, like just so much weirdness, and you know, you need that when you're the UFC and you're trying to be a legitimate sport. It gets kind of dry at times and boring and just kind of run of the mill. So Pride was really just excellent about spicing things up. And speaking of spicing things up, before that, Koji Kitao, he was a sumo wrestler that I believe was banished from sumo for breaking someone's arm or something like that. He took on 6'9", 345-pound Nathan Jones, who made his professional debut fighting out of Australia. These were giants, absolute giants. Good Lord. Nathan Jones, right? 6'9", threw a spinning crescent kick. Yeah. A 6'9", 345-pound crescent kick. Holy Lord.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's silly. They're two huge guys. And this is another interesting one in Pride, in sort of Pride history, because this is one of two fights on here that I am a little dubious of the legitimacy of. You know, I think there's, you know, you have to kind of ask and be like, are we sure that this one is 100% on the up and up? Which is kind of part of the game of early Pride, to sort of spot it and be like, you, sir, are not actually competing here. I see what you're doing.
And unfortunately, that was the thing about Pride. The referees, although they had the camera glasses, which were cool, they had the earpieces, which is not cool.
Yes, yeah, it's really true. And like Koji Kitao, pro wrestler. Nathan Jones would go on to be a pro wrestler. Like I think it's fair to have a little bit of a wonder about kind of the full legitimacy of that one.
But something that I did like was Stephen Quattros, I believe, said that he didn't think that they would see either of those again. He was like, they don't belong here. So shout out to him again for calling it like he saw it. Yeah. Now, before that, an absolute legitimate fight, probably fight of the night. This also went to a draw, but I didn't mind because it was fun for me. I love grappling. Renzo Gracie drew even with Akira Shoji, also known as Mr. Pride. He's been in like all the Prides ever. What a fun fight, man. Just what a fun fight. Someone who was, you know, basically fighting for his life the entire time, just self-defense and finding a way. It was like a cat and mouse game the whole time, like Tom and Jerry. Jerry always finding a way to escape. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. The crowd got into it. There was something for them in each round. What'd you think of the matchup?
I am so glad to hear you say that because I freaking love that fight. I am a huge fan of that one, but I'm not. I wasn't sure how alone I was in that. No, I totally agree. It's super fun.
Yeah.
You totally expect it to be the same thing as Hicks and Takada, right? You expect Henzo to come in there and take him down and submit him in like 5 minutes because it's another Gracie versus inexperienced pro wrestler. But Shoji just, man, he just gets out of there again and again, and like yeah, like you said, somehow or other he manages to be like, nope, survive that. That's right, Henzo, one of the best submission artists out there. You get me in the submission, I get out, and for 30 minutes he pulls that off. I love it. I think it's a great. I think it's thoroughly entertaining. One of my favorite of the early Pride fights.
And it's crazy because it was 30 minutes long. You know, there were 3 10-minute rounds, but
Right.
it was still 30 minutes long, but fun. There was a moment in the second round where Henzo, he took the back and locked up an arm bar, and then Shoji stands up and like shakes him off of him, and then just lets out this war cry, and the crowd goes crazy. The quiet Japanese crowd that we're not used to hearing erupted, went absolutely nuts. And it was just fun. Like, Shoji was so game. Like, he was so game and so ready. And there was times where you can see Henzo just has this snarl on his face, just looking disgusted that this guy's escaping his submissions. Like, it was just so much fun. So back and forth. It's almost like you watch the Discovery Channel and you see the seal escaping from the great white shark. It's the same exact thing. Like, you got to root for the guy to get away sometimes, you know?
You got to. How can you not? And that moment you cited is the best. That I know exactly the moment you're talking about. It is absolutely the best. Like, hearing the crowd go nuts, it's awesome. I feel like that fight is like a precursor that sets the stage for the whole Gracie's versus Sakuraba feud. Like, that's kind of like the preview for the main event yet to come. But man, it's a blast.
And to your point earlier, how you said how the Gracies were kind of always involved with Pride and kind of had their own sets of rules, even if it didn't affect the other matches. There was a moment where Shoji sprawled on Henzo. Henzo shot a really poor takedown. I think this might have been the third round. And Shoji, from the sprawl, starts kneeing the head, like right on. Like, that's what's up. And then the refs all like, oh, no, you can't do that because he's a Gracie and you can't be kneeing the head of a Gracie because that's foul.
No, yeah. And again, like, what exactly are the rules? It's a mystery. Why is that fight 3 10-minute rounds and Chemo versus Severn is 1 30-minute round? Like, I don't know. Who knows? That's just what they did.
Yeah, it was a real hodgepodge of rules, a real, just – but again, it was the first one. And –
yeah.
I really like how Pride was really on top of their rules and adjusting them as the sport evolved. And then, we saw the bringing in of the yellow cards, which fantastic. Like, you guys are stalling, boom, 10% of your purse. Stall again, boom, 10% of your purse. Like, that's a great idea. It really pushed the action.
It was a great idea. One of the things that I sometimes, I was thinking about this and wonder about, especially Henzo and Shoji there. I think sometimes about like a more modern fan who's maybe come to the sport in the past, call it 5-6 years, something like that. If taking that kind of fan and going back and like they watch something like that, like, what does that fan make of Shoji versus Henzo? Like, is it just too long? Is it, I don't know. Or do they just seem so rudimentary in their skills that you can't really get into it? I've been watching MMA since I think the first UFC that I got a Blockbuster Video, and it was like UFC, I want to say 8, I think, the David Goliath show.
Okay.
And that was like right after it had come out. So like, I'm used to these kind of like, less skilled from a technical standpoint, early pioneers. But yeah, I don't know if you've always come up on the current guys. What do you make of these?
That's an excellent question. As you can see, I'm an old head. I still got the box sets. But I don't know, man. It's I think the takeaway would be, even 20 years ago, Henzo Gracie's grappling is still it would be phenomenal today. It would, like, 20 years later, that guy's grappling would still run shop today, and it's just a testament to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Like, it's proven. It's absolutely proven. But going back, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm curious to see if, like, actually, let's challenge the people watching. If you're a somewhat new fan to MMA, go back and watch these fights and let us know what you think, because that's an excellent point. Being an old head going back, it's just nice to see how far the sport has actually come into the day where the day you learn a jab is the day you learn the arm bar, is the day you learn to sprawl. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before that, a scary, scary knockout. I mean, an absolute brutal knockout. Gary Goodridge knocked out Oleg Taktarov. Knockout round 1. This was scary. Goodridge drops him with this wicked right hand off the clinch. Oleg face plants, and then Goodridge comes in, like holds the back of his neck and just whacks him twice. The referee went the wrong route to get there to stop the fight. Brutal. Absolutely brutal.
Yeah, it's nasty. I mean, he is like face down, like completely unconscious, arms at his side, like a photo of a face down. It's like Pacquiao at the end of the 4th Marquez fight where he's just toast and there's just nothing going on. It is brutal, and that's a bummer, because I am, as far as like your kind of old school guys go, Taktarov is one of my guys. I really like him. Loved his fights in the UFC. This is a brutal, just a brutal knockout, but an entertaining slugfest that ends in sort of spectacular fashion. So, for your second fight of your first ever card, what more could you possibly want? I mean, it's scary, it's nasty, but it's MMA, man. And it's really, I mean, that's sort of the epitome of what MMA is capable of being, which is cool to see.
Yeah, it was just brutal, really is the best word for me. Gary Goodridge actually broke his foot kicking Taktarov in the face when he was sitting down. So Goodridge left out of there with a broken foot. Taktarov left on a stretcher, still unconscious. Like, they're wheeling him out, and Bas Rutten is like, well, hopefully everything's going to be okay with Oleg. I guess we'll find out later, but it's good. And they just like cut the promo for the next fight, and it's like, where are you guys taking him? Like, that's but luckily that was his last loss of his career, and he got into acting and stuff like that, so he was okay. But
how much did Taktarov fight after that? I can't even remember. He had that one fight.
Yeah, he went and fought a couple times, but I don't think he pulled together a couple wins. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wins. He beat Mark Kerr. That was his last fight. He won by knee bar, which is impressive.
That's the Yama pit fighting one, isn't it?
Yep. Yama pit fighting.
That's the epic one. Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, he was always fun to watch. He actually won a UFC. Mm-hmm. He defeated Marco Huas, the king of the streets back in the day.
I liked the Taktarov. He was good. Good stuff.
Yeah. And Goodridge himself, he was always a savage, but after that he was kind of the guy that everyone beat. Like, when I think of Gary Goodridge, number 1 is that crazy back crucifix with the elbows in the UFC, obviously. But after that, I just think of everyone that's beat him. Like, I just have this imprint of him losing over and over and over again. But I always liked him. I remember when the first UFC video game came out, I believe he might have been in it. So I've always been a Gary Goodridge fan. I wonder what he's doing nowadays.
Yeah, he's one of those old school guys that I'm a fan of and have much respect for. He's very active on Twitter. Writes a lot of motivational kind of stuff. And I think talks about, he talks on Twitter about some of the sort of struggles of the aftermath of a tough career, of getting punched in the head a lot and losing often and getting punched in the head. I think he's pretty open in talking about.
That's real stuff. And hey, that's the time to do it after the fact. You don't want to talk about that while you're still fighting and get removed from cards like what happened to Mark Hunt today. So
yeah,
that's crazy. All right, so the opening bout of the evening, the first Pride 1 fight ever. This is one of those that you were kind of alluding to earlier, that you don't know if it's on the up and up or not. Kazunari Murakami defeated Big John Dixon by submission, armbar at 134 into round 1. Big John Dixon, I guess that's better than John Big Dixon.
He contemplated it. He was back and forth. Where do you put the nickname?
97 was a different time.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a dud of a way to start the entire Pride legacy, to be like, that's it. That's the fight. Murakami and Dixon. This is how we're going to kick things off. But it does have a sweet judo throw. Murakami's throw in it is pretty gorgeous. So it's got that going for it. But yeah, Murakami's another pro wrestler. So
it made no sense. This fight didn't make any sense.
No, it's silly. But
Dixon caught a kick. He got a takedown, right? He stands up for some reason, lets Kazunari or Murakami up, and then closes the distance again for some reason. It gets judo tossed, and then it's like some suspect punches to the gut that I used to do to my buddies in the schoolyard in elementary school. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't look like he was really trying to hurt him. And then he took the arm bar. Was it on the up and up? Was the first fight of Pride BS? You tell us. Let us know in the comments section.
Well, I think that's one of the funniest things that's amazing about Pride is that about this first card is that, okay, so it's 7 fights, 1 of which is kickboxing, 2 of which might have been pro wrestling style works, leaving us with actually only 4 that we can really definitively say, yes, that was an MMA fight. And one of those 4 is bad, but who cares? It's a super entertaining time. It's, it set things out. There's flaws with it as a show, but I thoroughly enjoyed going back and revisiting it for this. It was a lot of fun to check it out again.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good, prelude to what was in store over the next decade. I mean, Pride really became a staple of the MMA landscape for a solid 10 years. And that's really impressive. They really did a lot of work. They ended up selling the company to Zuffa or the UFC back in 2007, and that was pretty much the end of that. But there is this organization called Risen that is kicking off in Japan. They're doing exciting things. Same rules as Pride back in the day. I believe some of the same owners. And I believe they're still with the Funk. So there's actually a card on this Sunday. They have a atomweight tournament for the females. They have, oh my goodness, Kazushi Sakuraba is taking on Frank Shamrock.
Right, which is amazing. Which is
a grappling match. But are you kidding me? I cannot believe that's going down.
It's awesome.
You got a pick for that real quick?
Oh, I have no idea. How do you? It's like those Bellator main events where you're like, what? How? Chael or Vanderlei? I have no concept what to say about that. I guess I will go with Sakuraba because he's my guy. Favorite Pride fighter by a landslide. Sakuraba. He's looked pretty bad and old lately, but whatever. I'm picking him.
That's fair. I'll pick Frank Shamrock. Just because Frank's one of those guys with the mystique around him that I feel like could have been better than what he was, but just never went for it or reached his potential for whatever reason. So yeah. I'll homer pick with Frank Shamrock there.
But, that's what makes it, man. If that had happened back in the day, that would have just come on. That would have been so awesome.
Man, there's a lot of fights we actually missed, but there was a lot of fights we did get, and Pride is the reason for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's our show, man. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Fraser, for joining me.
Absolutely, man.
Follow Fraser on Twitter at FCoffeen, I believe.
That's right.
Cool. You can follow me on Twitter at the Eddie Mercado. You can read both of us over at bloodyelbow.com. If you like the show, and I know you did, you can smash that like button for us. It's the thumbs up down there at the bottom, and it really helps us out. Tell us about your favorite Pride moment in the comments section. If you're an old head, an old MMA fan like we are, we would love to hear your thoughts on your favorite matchups, your favorite fighters from back in the day. Let us know. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Do us a favor and whitelist us on your ad blockers. It really helps us out. There's no UFC or Bellator this weekend. There is the Risen FF on Sunday. And we will be back next week with all of our shows. If I Did It, Care Don't Care, the MMA Vivisection, the regular 6th round, all that jazz. So we will see you next time. Now go be a good person.